Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon. Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rural Woman podcast. Today you'll meet Leah Peterson. Leah is a fifth-generation rancher working alongside her multi-generational family in Northeast Custer County, Nebraska. After the 2019 Nebraska bomb cyclone, she launched Clear Creek Ranch Mom to share resources during a crisis. That simple act grew into a community built on encouragement, connection, and a touch of humor. Leah is a wife to Matt, a mom to Maggie and Lucy. She champions new and beginning farmers and ranchers, supports families navigating transition to the next generation, and speaks up for self-care among busy moms. In today's episode, we talk about legacy and homesteading values, the moment ranching becomes a way of life, sharing the real story of agriculture online, weathering hard seasons, and why resilience and mental health must live side by side. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with Leah. Leah, welcome to the Rural Woman podcast. How are you today?
I am great. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to get to chat with you and to get to know you better. For the folks who are listening who are unfamiliar with you, give us your background. Who are you? Where are you from? And what is your connection to agriculture?
Well, where to begin? My name is Leah Peterson, and I'm known online as the Clear Creek Ranch Mom. My extended family and I live in rural Nebraska, what we call the gateway to the Nebraska Sandhills. And I'm grateful to be raising my family alongside my siblings and my parents together on our family operation that was homesteaded in 1878. We are what we call a diverse operation where we raise livestock and row crops. So there's always something to do. And with that, raise kids. So it's definitely a place that keeps us all on our toes. And I wasn't sure that I would end up back here, literally raising my family in the home where I grew up in, but that is how God led us and directed us. We ended up back here after a period of time after I left to go to college and met my husband. And I couldn't think of being anywhere else today. I'm truly grateful to be here in 2025, carrying out this dream, this vision, this goal that was started so long ago that has evolved and changed over the years, but stayed true to what the the hopes were, which was to help farm the land and care for the land and do our part to help feed the rest of the world.
Yeah, very cool. So obviously there is a long history of your family and deep roots on the ranch. Looking back to the earliest days of the ranch that you know about, what are some of the stories and values that those first generations have influenced your own perspective on agriculture?
Gosh, so many. What I think is remarkable about our story is some of the unique factors, just like every other originally homesteading family. What led them to America? So our ranch is ended up being a marriage of several places over the years, but originally on my paternal side of the family was a brother and a sister who came together to get things started. And how cool is that they got along well enough to travel to America together, and they were to carve out a place, and then tragedy struck, as it does, and the parents passed away before they got here, but they left, everything behind and came here. And on my that side of the family, she was one of the first school teachers in our particular area. They believed so much in the value of education, and the other homesteading families wanted their children to be educated, and they built a sod structure, and the first school children came. They had no books, no money, but people pooled their resources together because they believed in that. So alongside settling the land and homesteading, they were teaching. Additionally, another branch on my paternal side of the family, they were in public service. So they ranched and homesteaded and then gave of themselves to other community efforts as this area was settled. One bit of the family raised sheep. That was their start. That was what they were familiar with. The others raised beef cattle. We don't raise sheep anymore, but I always laugh when I think about that our roots here actually were in the sheep raising business. Which, again, just what's so remarkable is the resilience that had to be led. And I'm also grateful, and I guess I know where it comes from, the writing and the sharing, is that they were avid journalists, and they wrote their stories and they kept diaries. We still have them. It's remarkable to go back and read about the wolves and about making friends with the natives who came here, and the weather and the economic hardships and the wars, and that they kept on. And it wasn't without a lot of personal sacrifice and loss. The Spanish flu came through this community, and my grandfather lost 2 of his siblings the same winter to the Spanish flu as little babies. The resiliency, especially when I think of the women, I can't really put it into words how they persevered through those times. But it's all here. And for those of us here today, we say, well, those who are gone they're not watching us. They're not supervising to make sure we're doing it right. And yet you feel compelled to not lose what was so hard fought to get, if that makes sense. And a charge for our future generations to try to do it better, because it, again, wasn't without mistakes, but to be a responsibility, to be a weight to carry, but also to be such a privilege.
Absolutely. So many amazing nuggets of wisdom in there. The thing that I just keep going back to is trying to imagine my brother and I leaving a country together and starting a whole new life, and that working out.
Yes.
I don't think in the 90s that would have been very good for us to do.
And they remained lifelong friends, and he never
Absolutely.
married. He didn't marry. Sometimes I feel, well, I know my life would have looked different if he had, because the ranch would have stayed with him rather
Right.
than her. He never married, and yet they remained devoted friends for life, and she looked after him in his later years. He unfortunately died too soon, as many did, because of he wasn't married and didn't have a wife, nagging and looking after him to take care of himself after he'd been in a bad accident, actually, and he lost his life because of it. But that they remained friends, that's special. I mean, I have a photo of the sod home that they lived in together until he built his his frame home, which still stands today, and she got married. It was a very small space. They shared that space, and she taught school, and he carved on out the homestead and did the ranching and cared for the livestock, and she taught school so they could afford to be here. And just an amazing story.
Yeah, very cool. So, Leah, as a child growing up on your family ranch, do you recall a pivotal moment that made you realize that ranching wasn't just a job, but it was your whole lifestyle?
Yes, I can think of several times, and unfortunately, a lot of times that's wrapped in hardship too. I'm old enough, I remember enough about the farm crisis of the mid 1980s. And it came at a hard time because my father is a Army veteran, and he left his service to return home when those who were here fell into bad health. So he and my mother he left his Army career, came home, dug in and got started. And then the hardships of the 1980s came, where interest rates were high. They had a young family to take care of and elderly parents to take care of. Things were really hard. And I remember as a child, when I was mature enough to recognize the level of hard, and I know they protected me from a lot of it, that I understood that choosing a life in agriculture meant choosing the hard with the good, that a lot of times if you walk away from it, there is no path to return. And that is so different than being in a different career where you can leave a job and go elsewhere and start over, or leave for a while and come back to an industry. So hard and difficult. And also what rested on my father's shoulders was there wasn't anyone else besides him. So if he were to walk away from it, there wouldn't be anyone else. And I didn't know what the future of the ranch would be like. So I had to recognize that hardship and the burden of responsibility, the loyalty to the land, while also watching him be very torn at times between understanding all of that and taking care of a young family.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that you said that really that pivotal moment of it being a lifestyle, not just a job, typically does fall on those harder times versus, maybe the romanticized pieces of agriculture, right? It being the lifestyle that you ride your horse into the sunset, or that you have a combine date or anything like those, right? Like those are the pieces as a city kid. Like I remember those pieces being romanticized in my head, but when your crops don't come off the way that you were expecting them to, or the cattle market drops, those are the pieces where it's like, that's your one opportunity every year to make a paycheck. And those are the pieces that aren't talked about.
And for all of the criticism and the laughter at Taylor Sheridan and his efforts to create a vignette that looks at the ranching business through the different lenses and perspectives, I gave him a lot of credit, because interweaved into some very bad writing was some very good snippets that did a pretty good job of being that voice for exactly what you're speaking about, where those, what looks like from the outside, rainbows and sunshine, was anything but. And not, there's the conversations about the relationships, but also the work itself, the heavy load and the risk, the great amount of risk involved. As you say, when you're putting your eggs in a basket and then the bottom falls out in a bad year.
Yeah.
And the wrestling of really hard decisions.
Absolutely. So talk to me then about the career that you pursued off of the ranch.
Well, I was privileged to have a great education in a rural school setting, and then my local high school. And at the time, I'm the eldest. I have a younger brother. I didn't give much thought to returning to agriculture at all. So I went away to college, the university. I did not study agriculture, though I stayed rooted to finding the pockets of friends and experiences that really were related to agriculture. And I got my degree in education and at communications, and ended up pursuing a path in higher education, which was to serve as a college advisor, an academic advisor, because I have that background of many in my family being involved in education, as I said, from the beginning, and a passion for writing and helping. And so that's where I was pulled. I did work part-time with second jobs. I wrote for newspapers, worked at a local TV station along the way too, because I always had that flowing through my veins as well. I missed writing. So the things married together well. But it was when our eldest daughter was 4 and time to go to preschool, that the conversations I had with my husband were, I'm feeling pulled to go home. I'm feeling pulled to raise her where I was raised. And he had come from a family farm that was sold, so it wasn't an option to go back there. But that was where his heart was as well, was giving our children that experience. So it made the decision easy in the sense of knowing that's what we wanted to do, but challenging and thinking, how can we do this? Because there's not necessarily a place for us. How are we going to pay our bills while we go home, figuring that out. And that was a rough several years. It ended up that we came home just at the time where Nebraska was hit with a bad drought of 2012. Things were tough here, and it was right in the aftermath of my grandmother's untimely death. I call it that, even though she was 91, because she was fit as a fiddle and worked literally until the moment of her death. That it was a hard time to come home, and yet it was the right time because we could be here with our family to grieve together and find our new way forward when our matriarch was gone. But it wasn't without a lot of challenges, especially on the financial side of thing, which is the story for every beginning farmer rancher today. It's tough.
Absolutely. I think even if you're coming back into a multi-generational operation, there is still that pressure for like if the capital's not there or if the money's not there to put into whatever it is, like it's still that struggle and an adjustment back to a lifestyle that you were privy to. Obviously, your husband had some agricultural roots as well, but those roots are different, right? And bringing them together to create a new operation obviously has its challenges. Talk to me about those beginning years and, getting the dirt back on your boots and up until where you are today on the ranch.
Yeah, it is. That's the most unique challenge. My brother also transitioned back home near the same time. We'd been away working professionally, both of us, master's degree, married, children, thought I had a decent sense of intelligence, and you come home and you jump right back into working with family, and that is hard. And my dad was going through a lot with the loss of his mother, and I called her his mother, but also his business partner. Suddenly has 2 children back home, ready to jump in and helping to try to identify whose role is what and where do we fit in, and who has these strengths, who has these less than developing skill areas, who's new here, which, my husband had helped seasonally and whatnot ever since he became part of the family. But you're right, the dynamics changed very much, and raising our own family at the same time. It's like a choreographed dance, except you don't know what the next move is going to be a lot of the time. So my husband and I both had to find our own sources of income. We worked off the place, we raised kids, and then as nights and weekends and holidays, we were here, filling in, pitching in, and eventually, now it's been 12 years, starting to transition over some of the responsibilities fully to my brother and my husband. So they have now assumed almost all of the farming components of the operation over these last few years, piece by piece. My dad has been content to relax more into the livestock side of the business, which I would have always called, since my childhood, his favorite piece. It's not that you can't love both. It's just sometimes I think you just have a natural draw to one area over another. So he relaxed into the livestock side of things with us filling in and being there alongside him. But slowly, which has been also a blessing because I have so many friends and peers who have been thrust into those driver seats without a moment's notice. Somebody died or something happened and you suddenly were told, here, take the reins, you're in charge, and not equipped very well to do that. And that is hard also. So I can't say that there is any one right way to do it, but if I could choose, I would always choose the transition time and opportunity to learn and grow and carefully and gently pass the baton on rather than just have it dropped or thrown at you. And those places, those people do fine as well, but that's hard. And change is hard for everyone. Some embrace it more easily or readily than others.
Yeah, absolutely. And the piece about having that transition time versus being thrusted in is truly a gift. And it is hard. Like, it's hard at any point in that transition journey, but you have to choose your hard, right? Like we all said, change is difficult, but choose the difficulty level of that change for yourself and for your family. And I'm always grateful to hear of the stories of transition planning that goes relatively well and to share those stories. You can help support the stories of women in agriculture to be shared through the Rural Woman podcast on Patreon. What is Patreon? It's a membership-based platform that helps fund and support creators like me to create and produce content like this that you all love. New to the Rural Woman podcast Patreon is ad-free listening and patron-only bonus content and exclusive episodes. Learn more and join the patron gang today at patreon.com/The Rural Woman Podcast. I want to talk about, you had mentioned your generations on the farm and their love of writing and recording their stories. Talk to me about sharing your story on social media and what really inspired you to start sharing on digital platforms.
I've been a writer since I was a child, and my sister is a very gifted poet. She would write short poems through our childhood. My brother is very talented at photography and telling stories through pictures. I'm envious of how he's able to use the lens to tell the story. And I find that fascinating because we have cousins equally gifted. So I know it runs through our veins. And I think about my father keeps a day book that is his private journal. So, and my mother is a gifted writer, and before them, the generation. So we come by it naturally. I did not believe that I was going to share beyond like my personal, Facebook platform. I would share a photo from calving season, planting season. I would tell a short story. It wasn't until actually an exchange with one of my daughter's teachers who said, you really need to share these stories with people. They need the connection, the encouragement, the laughter, the nostalgia. You have an ability to bring a story to life. So I started a social media presence. It was very small. Like I said, it was friends, family, and nosy neighbors. And it was the bomb cyclone of March 2019 that took that tiny little landing place to this larger community that grew rapidly at first, where my goal in the aftermath was to share our hardship, not for sympathy, but to say compassionately, we're going through this, and we know thousands of you are going through this. We are here for you. Let's be here for one another. And the resounding response was amazing, which was, thank you. It's hard to put the hardship into words, but also, I'm not affected by this, but I'd like to help. And Nebraska and South Dakota and Iowa in particular at that time were in desperate need of help, relief, because of that magnitude of crisis. So it became a place where people to share resources. And I love that feeling to know that I helped connect people with help that needed help. And it's just like the wildfires that have scourged America over the years, the flooding, the hurricanes. We often say, I'm sending my thoughts, I'm sending my prayers, and all of those are important. And offering a way for people to actually do something and help has been gratifying. And that's the journalist in me too, telling real stories and helping connect people. A way for everyday Americans just to help and be able to give to a name and a face. And we've become also more skeptical, wanting to be sure our funds are going where they were supposed to go and helping the people they're supposed to help. But that has been the most amazing connection I've made on social media, is actually feeling like I know these people and being able to help people connect with one another. And so with sharing of resources, then my social media presence really became community. It's happening today. There's been some amazing dialogue there's a large ranch for sale in Nebraska. Dialogue between people about looking for land, and dialogue between people going through the hardships of calving season and the joys of calving season and preparing for the spring planting season and leaning on one another for support and connection. That is my most favorite part. And have been criticized over the years for being maybe too soft and too quiet about issues that matter to agriculture. And it's not that I'm not well informed or don't have strong opinions, but I decided that there's enough of that out there. I don't need to add more to those conversations. I love the idea that we have true community where all people are welcome as long as they're kind. And we don't make political statements and we don't get into controversial things. Now, if I have someone that comes trolling and saying things that aren't true, I do handle that, or I block them if they become really extreme and threatening. But there's so much intrigue and interest out there. I do believe consumers really do care. They want to know, they want to understand the work, the people behind what brings food to the table. I don't like to dismiss questions. I like to welcome people. I want them to feel like they're in a safe place to ask their questions and get real honest answers and feedback. And it has served me well. I have a lot less babysitting to do on my site because people generally mind their manners. And that's gratifying because I don't have time to deal with all that drama. But that ultimately has been my goal, is to create community amongst people. And there are so many great questions and so many wonderful people who lived agriculture at one time or another, or have relatives or family and they miss it. Or maybe they're interested in trying to figure out how to get into the business and they need help and guidance and support. It's a really fun conglomerate of all kinds of people from all walks of life. And I have friends in Canada on my page. I have friends in Australia on my page, and ranchers and farmers from other countries, where I also feel like I can still be a beacon of what we talked about earlier, which is just we're all people being people who want the good for our families and one another. And maybe that calm rhetoric between us can help with relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, like looking back, what a time to start really sharing your stories in a broader sense. You had mentioned, with friends, family, and nosy neighbors, which I love that nosy neighbors part. But 2019 and a bomb cyclone. For the uneducated of weather events, what is a bomb cyclone in layman's terms? I'm curious to know.
Yeah, so my first college major actually was broadcast journalism and meteorology. I felt like I was called to do weather forecasting, so I've always had a fascination with it. But a bomb cyclone is just a fancy word for an extreme weather event that involves a lot of wind. What happened in Nebraska was the strong weather event came right after long spell of cold. The ground was so frozen, and this is my strange bit of humor, but we're very good friends with our folks who dig grapes in our community. It was so cold that he had to order special tools to be able to cut through the sod to dig grapes that winter. I mean, the frost was so thick. What happened was a rapid warm up with extreme rain. The ground was so frozen that the water couldn't absorb, and we had massive flooding. The water came up in ways that my dad, who is 74, had never seen in his life. And the water was moving so quickly. We had rapid deteriorating conditions. We had all this new baby livestock everywhere, and cattle were literally swept away, and fences were swept away. We had some fatalities. We had dam failures in our rivers, and then it just picked up steam as it went downstream. And the heart-wrenching photos were, well, frankly, I cannot believe we didn't have more loss of life because the event happened that quickly. So I give credit to farmers and ranchers who give of themselves so much that they would have given their lives for their livestock. And I wish I could tell that message better, but that we didn't have more loss of life. I don't know how we didn't, but we had massive losses of livestock and massive losses of feed that literally was washed away.
Wow.
And people's cattle were all mixed up together and stranded. And that's why I say it was such a needed quick emergency response where you have resources, but they're not in place to do that kind of massive work. It became a matter of neighbor knowing that neighbors needed help and executing the plans to get people out quickly to help one another. And they really responded in force, which was as simple as bringing feed for animals because so-and-so's feed was all gone, or taking in livestock because the neighbor's fences were all gone. Meanwhile, new life in March, new life is being born every moment of the day. And so people just needed help and support, and they were shell-shocked, for lack of better words. I mean, I remember a moment that afternoon when the eye of the storm passed and the winds calmed for a moment and it warmed and the rain stopped. And we knew the next day a blizzard was coming. My dad saying, I mean, everything was underwater, saying, I don't know what to do. That's when I became afraid, because my father is of that generation where everything is black and white, that I was rattled. If he didn't know what to do, how could I know what to do? We worked through it together as a team, as a family, and it was a remarkable event. And it's not unlike the wildfires that have swept the plains, which is crazy. We talk about flooding and then we talk about wildfires. The same, these extreme weather events, extreme acts of Mother Nature that leave us all on our heels, because we can outsmart and outthink and outplan a lot, but Mother Nature does what she's going to do. And people who work the land are really at the mercy of that. And that's hard to explain to others.
Absolutely. And, like you said, these extreme weather events are happening in all parts of the world, and so unexpected, and, not knowing what to do, because like you said, we can outplan a lot of things, but there's also a lot of things in agriculture that we can't outplan, including a global pandemic, including, political unrest, including all of XYZ that has happened in the last 6+ years. And for you to be able to create a community and a space where you're able to share your stories and the stories of your community is really important. And I think that's something that often is overlooked or not really looked at as being really a need. But I would counter that in saying in the last 6+ years, I feel like community is the one thing that we've all been looking for and wanting. So in building this community, the relationships that you're building or the community that you're seeing, do you feel like you are speaking to mostly farmers and ranchers, or are you speaking to a lot of people that don't have that current connection to agriculture?
I would say, based on my current demographics, most of the community has a tie to agriculture, potentially retired or extended family. And ultimately, they all have an appreciation and an understanding. I do have many, I call them the quiet appreciators. They don't say much, and they'll write me privately and say, I don't want to ask a dumb question. I'm concerned that people may not be kind if I ask this question, but I really would like to know, would you take the time to tell me the answer to whatever it might be? And that makes me sad because I do feel like that's an extension of like how volatile things are right now. People are not kind to one another or offer much grace to begin with. We have these instantaneous reactions and fire away. I try very hard to not make those assumptions and ask people not to make those assumptions because they literally don't know. They don't know and don't understand. And it can be very, very simple things. What it has done for me is illuminate the need to get more education opportunities provided to our young people so that while they grow up learning about rainforest deforestation and the dangers of that, that they're equally learning about the importance of caring for our grasslands. And my other hat that I wear as a nonprofit leader is education about taking care of our plains and grasses and the soil, the importance of that. And that's for everyone to learn and understand. If you live in a high-rise apartment, you can still have appreciation for caring for the land, and you can do your part as simply as understanding why water is a finite resource and we shouldn't waste it. I mean, just very, very simple things. And going to the grocery store and making informed decisions and asking the right people if you have questions, that everyone can be involved in those conversations. So my goal and my hope is actually to become a community where I am the minority, so to speak, that I do have the ability to attract people who are literally coming there because they would like to learn, because they don't know and they don't understand and they want to, and that they feel like they can trust me and the people in our community to answer with kindness and clarity and be welcoming. And it's more important than ever there because there's not enough of us. There's not enough in our community to carry on this much of the responsibility for the land and the crops and the livestock. We need people to embrace agriculture and say, I can do that. I can give that a try. I'm interested in being part of that. And so we have to do that by telling the truth in an authentic, transparent way, or there won't be enough of us soon. There won't.
And I think it's important to view this too as in, there's not enough of us to raise food or grow crops and to be farmers and ranchers, but there's also not enough of us in a storytelling way sharing the stories of agriculture. I know as somebody that this is my job, I am a storyteller in agriculture. Sometimes it can feel like Tom, Dick, and Harry and everybody in between is telling stories because that's what we see, right? But in the grand scheme of things, if people aren't connected to agriculture or aren't directly connected to a farmer in some way, shape, or form, and even online, then it can feel like we're screaming into a silo of just talking to everyone in agriculture. So I think creating the spaces where people feel safe to ask the quote, dumb question is so important, specifically coming from a woman herself who has asked all of the dumb questions, right? And I've been responded to with kindness, but I've also been responded to like, are you serious? Like, why don't you know this? Like, this should be something that you know. But talking to you, Leah, like we could talk about like an enrollment funnel in a post-secondary education and like we would get it. But a farmer probably wouldn't know anything about that either. So really there's so many different streams of knowledge, whether it comes to book smarts or street smarts or farm smarts or whatever it is, it's all connected. And creating these spaces where people can feel comfortable to ask those questions, I think is more important than ever.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm so in love with what they're calling the homesteading revival. And I see all these pages springing up and women in particular talking about their efforts to create a homestead on their half acre or 10 acres and the different enterprises they're trying. And I love it because I'm also very passionate about food security. And I think that comes from some of those hard times in the mid 1980s where we were raising the food for the world, but we ourselves were food insecure because things were really hard financially. So I feel very strongly about food security and empowering people to be part of that. And my favorite things about like the 4-H program, for instance, is taking a young child at age 8 and showing them the magic. I call it the magic, the beauty of
planting a seed in the soil and caring for it, and then growing something then that will pay you back. And I talk about that often, that most Americans can get a can and some soil and some seeds and grow some cherry tomatoes. That's being part of that system I talk about, which is creating food security for yourself and your family and your community, but also contributing to that conversation about what it means to care for the land, to care for the soil, to be part of agriculture, because there is room for everyone to be part of the story. And we need that. It used to be that way. I mean, I didn't know anyone who didn't know about ag or have a connection of some sort or understand the connection between farmers and consumers. But there is a pretty big gap now, and it really will take all of us to be part of filling that gap. That's how I feel.
Absolutely. You have mentioned, about the resilience of your generational family, but also the resilience of your community, specifically women in agriculture. Why do you think it's so crucial for women to prioritize their well-being in our industry?
Yeah, history is full of stories. And unfortunately, I think important pieces are left out because we, at whatever time, developed this idea that we couldn't tell the hard parts. And so when I read some of the diaries, I mean, my great-grandmother, she wrote about the night that my grandmother was born, and she literally wrote, "I did not feel well last night, and our daughter is named Mary Bell." Like, she felt like she couldn't even write about the truth of childbearing and what that was like. And I read between the lines now in some of those old stories, and I know there was postpartum. I know there was depression. I know there was brokenness. I know there was anxiety. And that wasn't just for the women, that was for everyone. But we champion these ideas, like you said, these romantic ideas of what it was like. We left out the hard parts. And while it is so important to talk about the resiliency needed, I mean, it's a necessary component of surviving and thriving this life. We have to talk about how you become resilient. In my opinion, my untrained, unprofessional opinion is that being authentic about the struggle and how you work through those things to be that resilient person is equally important. My grandmother, I never saw her weep a tear. She didn't let us read her diaries until she had passed. And I read them and I read about her personal pain. And all I could think of as a teenager was, my God, does nothing rattle this woman? She was resilient through and through and through, and she was. But I wished that she had a space to rest from that, because it cost her. And my fear, because we know, and I follow Leslie High Heels and Canola Fields there in Canada, and Elaine Freeze, one of my favorite speakers on farm ranch succession planning, is that mental health is not good in our community. We have so many who still struggle and suffer in silence, that they appear to be resilient, but they have great struggle, and it does cost them, and it costs their families, and we have addiction and other challenges. And now I'm really rambling, but the resiliency comes at a great cost. And I just feel like there has to be a better way to helping people be resilient. I think two things can be true. I think you can be resilient and you can talk about that there are times you don't want to be, or times you haven't been, and that you could use some help to be more resilient, rather than just trying to paint this brush over it that, well, that's just how it is. We're just resilient and we move on, because we all know someone who didn't make it.
Right.
And I don't just mean, that their life ended, maybe it ended prematurely, but they got divorced, or they were addicted, or they're broken relationships with family or friends. And so I feel like there has to be a better way. So How do we grow resilient farmers and ranchers without telling them that they can't tell the hard parts too?
Right. I have goosebumps all over my body here from the two things can be true. You can be resilient and you can also rest. And one thing that I have learned the hard way is that rest doesn't need to be earned. You deserve to rest. I think we can be our own harshest critics when it comes to, well, have we done enough? Have we done enough to justify, not going back out to work after supper or, taking that family vacation when I should be or could be doing all of these other things? And I myself, I am not professionally trained or educated in anything way, shape, or form when it comes to mental health. All I know is my story. And I know the importance of sharing our stories when it comes to the struggle, because you don't know who's listening. You don't know who heard you say that I've had these bad days too. I've had these bad thoughts too. And I've gotten through it. And this is what it looks like for me today. How can we get you to that other side now? And for people to hear your story and then get curious about their own story. And by sharing our stories online and in a public space, hopefully creating those conversations that we know nothing about, obviously getting the DMs or the comments or whatever else saying like, this really helped me. That's great. But I myself, I'm not here for that. I'm here for just sharing, being a human and showing up and being able to share other stories who are willing. We don't have to do this in a public way all of the time. And I think the conversations around our dinner tables are going to be the things that really push us forward. But having the courage to say, you can even blame it on Caitlin and Leah. You can be like, hey, I heard this podcast and they shared this about resilience. What do you think about that? Just creating the dialogue around it. Like you said, suffering in silence is literally the most painful way I can think of dealing with any emotion. So thank you for sharing that. And, I think we all have those stories like you have about your grandmother, where we see somebody as this pillar of strength and that they've never cracked a day in their life. And I think sometimes I look at my story or really anything and be like, oh, I wish I could be a little bit more like that. But again, at what cost does that come? And I'm here to say that at any cost, that's too much.
Yes, you are needed. You are needed in this world, and there is only one you. There will only be one you. And our industry, and I wonder sometimes, I've wondered if it maybe comes from where we've descended in different parts of Europe. I come from a very private Stoic group. So they wrote their stories. They didn't share them publicly. They were in their own diaries and books. And I've had family members say, I can't believe you told the world that. Or I can't believe you shared that part of your story. And for me, pregnancy loss has always been part of my story and my cancer diagnosis last year. Why do you feel like you need to tell the world about us having an outbreak of sickness and losing baby calves? Because that looks like a measure of failure. What I always say is it's not about me. It's about us collectively. And if I can share something in words, like you said, that will resonate with another person to say, okay, she's going through it too. If she's going through it with me, I can keep going. Or she's giving me permission to call the doctor. I haven't given myself permission to get help with this, but I hear another person saying, it's all right. You don't have to put the place first today, which was my story a year ago with my skin cancer diagnosis at the very busiest time of the year, and me trying to argue with the doctor saying, I don't have time for this. And the doctor saying, I know you rancher types, you better make time for this.
Yep.
Giving you permission to do that thing. We accidentally or intentionally put so much of our identity in our work that we have a hard time thinking about who we are without that identity. And so when you take the vacation or you rest or you say, I don't want to do this anymore, or I'm tired of this, I want a new life, a new career, we're our own harshest, worst critics and enemies at times because it feels like that we don't know how to separate ourselves from that identity of being a farmer, rancher, and agriculture. It can be very, very difficult. It's also why I think so many have a hard time retiring, how you want to classify what that means, is because when you've poured so much of your life, your money, your time, your energy, your blood and sweat and tears into this thing, you don't know how to set it down. And that's the battle in Nebraska and many other farms and ranches across the Great Plains, is trying to make way for the next generation without really having a plan, because this has been your whole identity forever. You don't know how to see your life as anything else.
Absolutely. Leah, what is next for you in the Clear Creek Ranch Mom journey?
Well, I have a side interest of writing children's books for the light-hearted, gentle introduction of agriculture to the masses of children. I've written one. It's been a long time since I did that project. It's time to write more. So that's a goal of mine. I have a child who will be flying the coop in a year to go to college, and on the journey of her thinking through all of the things that I did at age 18 about, am I meant to pursue this life or go elsewhere? And as I write about balancing telling the truth to your children enough that they understand, but not so much that they become resentful or say, I didn't know, what this life would be like. So walking that journey with her as she decides what her future looks like, and helping care for aging parents who are still at the farm. It's a unique, like I said, unique choreographed dance where you don't really know what the next move is. You move from day to day. I also work with a nonprofit completely funded by sources that are now potentially being considered as not going to be continued, as the United States is evaluating its priorities and what gets money and what doesn't get money. And so that will be interesting over the next year. Markets are tough right now for row crop farmers, really tough. Inputs may become way more expensive in the short term, we hope only. Cattle market is good. We also face drought again. So I say it's not unlike other years. It's just that the next year in particular feels more eventful, but I just don't know what those are. So my goal is to try to continue to write and speak for those in the trenches with me who feel like they have a place to belong, where someone is helping tell their story or how they're feeling or try to explain. But also my goal is right now to convince others to tell their stories. I have two women in particular I've been helping a little bit. They're trying to find their way to tell their stories in their own unique lens. And one of them, I'm excited for her. She's an older rancher who survived a really, really bad accident, but has such an amazing story to tell, and an encouragement to other women who are on the older side of things, but still doing this. And another is a younger one. I've stepped my foot into public speaking. Again, I'm not an influencer. I'm not a magnetic personality that's kind of gives a rah-rah speech. I just enjoy connecting with audiences of women in particular and encouraging them to write and share their stories too. So it'll be an interesting time this next year. I've become a huge advocate for preventative maintenance on skin care. So people can always count on that from me. A lecture to not skip your dermatology appointments, and the sun, the thing that farmers and ranchers rely on every single day to do our work, is also your worst enemy if you don't take care of yourself and stay on top of quality skin care and seeing your doctor and all preventative medicine for that, for lack of better words, taking care of you, because there is that only one you. So becoming an advocate for wellness, physical and mental and spiritual wellness. So plenty to do. it doesn't all help pay the bills.
And yet all still important. So how does that add up? I never know.
Yeah, I never know. I think I have so many wonderful writer friends that maybe look for a brand deal or a paid speaking opportunities. One of the things, and I've done it to myself, is I have a large audience who believe, and we've created this, right, that we are sort of thinking we're owed the news for free, right? We tune in to the news, we read it constantly. It's too much, in my opinion, but it's all free information flowing to you. And so people will write me, well-intentioned, wwonderful people, hundreds and hundreds of messages. Will you answer this question? Will you answer this question? And I try to respond to people sometimes to simply say, I'm sorry, you're going to have to do your own research because I don't have time, because Clear Creek Ranch Mom is not a compensated woman. She earns a few Facebook bucks once in a while through their monetization program, but I do it all for free. It's a service and I love providing it, but I also have my limits because I am responsible for helping put food on the table here for my family. So if I'm busy doing all the free, and I'm also a volunteer and involved in my community heavily, I've got to try to balance that with doing the things to help buy the groceries too.
Absolutely. Leah, my last question for you is, what is the most rewarding thing about being a rural woman for you?
The rewarding part for me is never about what I'm doing. It's about the people I'm raising. And I am gratified to be able to have the privilege of raising my children in the same pastures. And to be able to do it alongside family is especially meaningful. We live in a culture where people can pack up and move and start new lives and in new communities constantly and live these adventures. And sometimes I'm envious of that. But it is a gift to raise my children near their grandparents. It's a gift to be able to raise them with their cousins and aunts and uncles. It's a gift to raise them in community amongst the people I grew up with. It's a blessed assurance that if something happens to me, that community will look out for my children. And it makes me emotional because I know others will never know what that experience is like. I do feel heartened that Americans are waking up to remembering how valuable community is. It comes with its hardships, but it's an invaluable gift, and I can't put it into words.
Beautifully said, and truly a gift to be able to raise your family in this community, and for you to be building a community online where people feel valued and heard and respected. Also, in my eyes, just as equally lucky to be part of that community. So, Leah, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. For the folks who would like to connect with you online after the show, where can they find you?
You bet. I am online at Facebook at Clear Creek Ranch Mom and Instagram, Clear Creek Ranch Mom. And maybe one day we'll have a website. But for now, just have some limited exposure on social media, and I invite anybody to join the community, and I appreciate the opportunity to share today and to represent not just myself and my family, but that wonderful community at Clear Creek Ranch Mom. They're the joy of my life.
Absolutely. I will link all of those in the show notes so people can find you and connect with you. Thank you again, Leah, so much for sharing your story with us today. I truly appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity. Keep up the good work, Caitlin. Your storytelling abilities and sharing are noted and appreciated very much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer, and a special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon.